Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Meet Jason Radisson, CEO and founder of Movo, a human capital management platform that uses advanced AI to automate the process of hiring, engaging, and retaining today's frontline workforce with this innovative AI-forward solution for retailers. Let's listen in now. Jason, welcome to the Voice Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Michael. Great to be on.
Fantastic. Where am I finding you this morning?
I'm in Minneapolis, our fair city.
Yeah? Are you from Minneapolis? I don't think so. Are you from?
No, not originally. There's a family tie here, and we've got family here locally, but I'm not. I'm a pandemic transplant from the Bay Area.
Fantastic. A pandemic transplant. We're still talking about that, which actually foreshadows some questions I have for you later about the changing nature of workforce and the things that the COVID era did. And so you're in a very dynamic space, and thanks for taking the time to chat with me. Let's talk about you for a little bit. So let's see. My goodness, looking at your CV, you're a Fulbright scholar. You've got a bunch of languages.
I was in a hurry to kind of bootstrap my life. I grew up poor, and school and work was kind of how I got where I am. And I think the system still works. I think it's validation that the way the U.S. is that we still there's a path. If you want to come here and work hard, there's definitely a path, and I'm living proof of it.
Your degrees are in science and technology. We're going to talk about technology and the work you do. Were you always oriented for technology? Were you naturally biased towards that? Was just that a natural flow for you?
I think I came out of and I'm a middle-aged guy. I came out of the days when computer science was super nascent, and for me, applied math was really the track. And I, at one point in my career, in my college career, was sort of between engineering, and I liked particularly optical physics and optical engineering. And I was almost going to go that path, and I ended up going more the applied math and microeconomics path. But all that said, in this day of data-driven systems and all of the kind of algorithmic and automation things that we're doing out there in computer science, it was kind of the right path, or it ended up being the right path for me. Long before we had sort of like data engineering and data science tracks at colleges and universities. So
no kidding. No, what do you do today?
Had to self-train. Yeah.
What do you do today for a living?
Today I run a company called Movo. Movo is a workforce automation app for the frontline worker, and solving a bunch of efficiency and productivity and engagement problems for the frontline worker. Just a mobile native, simple app for everybody to use that gets you a lot of efficiency. In getting here, I came up through one stage of my career, which was corporate change management. I worked at McKinsey. I worked at a couple of big Fortune 100 companies in the U.S. during some consolidations and industry consolidations, a bunch of M&A, post-merger management, on a couple of deals, several deals in the U.S. And then I'd say this last 15 years or so, I've been working in software, and specifically the gig economy. I ran part of the country for Uber. I ran a big Uber competitor in Latin America as kind of my biggest exit so far. Sold the company for $1 billion a couple years back, and have been helping that ecosystem quite a bit between Brazil and Colombia. That's where I've been really heavily involved, and I think where some of the most interesting things are happening in the gig economy and in retail. And we look to a lot of these developing markets for inspiration, and frankly, they're not burdened by a lot of the momentum that we have in a big economy like the U.S. or a big sort of Anglo-Saxon community as we have globally, and are able to go on very innovative and different paths. And I've been taking a lot of the inspiration, and that's flowed into the companies and the projects I've been doing kind of ever since.
What drew you to the, if we call it the HR space? Clearly, you've got lots of experience, as you say, in the gig economy. It is a very crowded space, particularly in the retail sector. Did you see some white space, and What's different about your solution, or how you thought about your solution that would find itself a little bit of purchase in the community?
Totally. I think, the white space, as I see it, is usually, I look at, what are very powerful technologies and the intersection of those very powerful technologies with huge sort of untapped opportunities in the world. We'll probably talk about some of my experience, sort of in the early days of consumer algorithms and some of the stuff that I was doing, 15, 20 years ago. I look in sort of the same way. And, back then it was, Amazon and eBay and some algorithmic competitors were clearly out there in automation, and some would argue 10, 20 years still ahead of where big retailers are. And there was just that huge kind of white space of traditional companies trying to catch up with what clearly was technology-wise the best way to go. I look at the workforce today, and you look out there, in the US, we talk about something like 30 million frontline workers. And it's technology backwaters. It's, largely pen and paper. It's very undigitized. And there's huge opportunity there. And, you look at the traditional HR platforms, they're not in that game. They're peddling 30-year-old software and, doing risk management in the back office. And they're not out there really driving productivity to the people who need it most, to the people who could benefit from it most, the part of the economy that could benefit from it the most. So, the problem to solve for me is the digitization of the blue-collar worker. And you look at where we are today with declining workforces in rich countries and even now in developing countries, as much as we'd love to think that, things are just going up and to the right, really there's this whole part of the economy that is just continually, either been in flat or declining sort of standard of living and productivity for the longest time. So I think that's the mission. And, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the category is HR. I think fundamentally these are operational systems for improving the efficiency of work. And that's not traditionally been HR's role. HR is, not there at frontline productivity, pulling those frontline productivity levers. It's generally sort of the operations of the business where there's the most impact. And there's typically sort of our client and where I think the opportunity is in the world these days.
When did you start the company?
I started the company back in 2020, in January of 2020. At least we experimented a little bit in 2019 with some pilots, and then January of 2020 went live in the U.S. in a couple of smaller clients, and then in March of 2020 did a deal with Amazon to help them in some of their most critical locations, and then that really was a tremendous account and tailwind throughout the pandemic as we helped them stay on top of their labor situation in a number of big plants.
Now, I want to take a side detour a little bit, because you've got a tremendous history in growing companies. And what's the alchemy behind that? I mean, whether you're a startup in 2020 or whether you're a 100-year-old company, everyone's looking for growth. What from your experience, a lot of great experience, both watching and in the kind of the McKinsey style or doing it, what are the key strategies that leaders need to know to think about growth and growing their business?
Well, I think it's a great question, and at the heart of really everything that I do, and I think a lot of really the upside, as a shareholder out there, or as an exec, or both, whatever your listeners might be. I think you've got to look at every big business really has a number of levers that, for one reason or another, aren't being pulled. And, whether it's, in the case of 99, a company that has sort of been stagnant for years and years as a taxi app, where the levers for growth were bringing peer-to-peer product in, they were, optimizing sort of customer acquisition and retention and in very automated and sort of novel ways for that market. Like, whatever those levers are, I think step one is really just identifying them and sort of gaining consensus at the top level of the company, that those are the levers that needed to be pulled. And, once you've sort of...
Do you start that from the business model perspective or from the customer perspective? What's your experience?
It really depends. And I think any inspiration is perfectly fine.
Wherever
yeah. Personally, because I think it ends up being this kind of, sort of potpourri of topics. It's a mixture, and any lens is fine. Any segmentation ideas are fine. At the core, they should feel like like a project that can be executed, and maybe not by the people who are currently in the company, maybe not by even the current business as it is. You may need to go outside of that, but I think being very clear as a leadership team that, here's a couple, and if I think of my Fortune 100 days, for us, a decently sized project is, a good billion, could be $2 or $3 billion of in-year impact.
Sure.
And, down to, sometimes in a startup, you're chasing the next $500,000, $1 million idea. So, I think it's sort of being very clear as a leadership team on that level, like, these are the 3, 4, 5 things that we're not doing, and these are the dollars that are attached to them. And I think the workshop works very well. I've in a number of my teams, and I've worked for some amazing CEOs throughout the years, and every time that we were able to sort of get in a room and decide that, like, these are the $5 billion worth of things that we're not doing that we should do, we come out of that situation with incredible alignment. And I think, you're just not going to get there with your standard operating meeting where, you're sort of optimizing or you're preventing downside or you're doing your day to day. You've kind of got to get into a room and start with, essentially a whiteboard and a bunch of stick-its and, start to get to really what those ideas are and those things are that we're not doing.
Now, in some ways, we're talking about incremental, not so incremental when you're talking about billion-dollar transformations. What do you think about large-scale transformation? So I have another podcast, Remarkable Retail, with Steve Dennis, and he's got a book just out, Leaders Leap, and is part of the subtext of that is the curse of the timid transformation, or that not taking risks is right now riskier than taking big swings. And we could think of many retailers across North America who are kind of stuck, right? They need a tremendous transformation, not incremental one-off kind of changes. What's your appetite for advising and taking risk along that? And do you agree with that philosophy?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's everybody's risk is, I don't know. It's sort of your thermometer is your own thermometer, I think. And, leadership teams have sort of their own gauges, and, what might be reckless for one company is, just sort of daily operating for another company. I think the startup practice that really works well is to sort of run a portfolio of sort of two-way door experiments. Like, these are things that, we think there may be the next big idea in there. We think that there, is incredible opportunity to apply something we've seen somewhere else. I think just having the chops to do that, and the best organizations that I've seen that I've worked with, and I try to do this on my own teams, you need some sort of standard model for running experiments. And I think we're right now in this day of Gen AI, where people are running a bunch of proof of concept, proof of value experiments with, end startups, and trying to, make sure that they're protecting themselves from some, potential disruption. I think if you have a muscle in the company where you just run 10, 20 of these experiments at all times, you're there and you can just feed them in. And I think that's one of the healthiest things that you can do in terms of just staying on top of sort of where the industry is going. I also think that, people do at this point really need some kind of committee that's looking around, kind of the next 2 or 3 corners on Gen AI. But, that said, I think we're still very early in, most of the obvious value creation from Gen AI is mostly like customer service kinds of things and sort of, kind of low to mid-level business analyst kind of work, and the ability to automate that. And, you should absolutely take advantage of that stuff. But you do want people that are looking around that next 2 or 3 corners, and so that you're not going to be disrupted by some major technological leap here.
It's a bit of a loaded question for you, I guess. But let's talk about AI. I mean, let's dive in, and we're 14 minutes in, and we've raised it a couple of times. It is the topic du jour. Certainly, it's the technology du jour. You and I, in our careers, have seen lots of technologies come and go. Some have been spectacular. Some have been just nonsense. What inning are we in AI? What's your with your great experience, what's your attitude? What's your perspective on AI? And if you're a baseball fan, what inning do you think we're in right now with this AI? You're talking like it's pretty early days, but what's your perspective? Is there or should we be spending all this time talking about this?
Well, I think I think it's 2 answers. So the first answer would be Gen AI. I think we're first or second inning, and the use cases will be proving themselves out for the next 20 years or so. I think, if you take, broadly speaking, a wider definition, and you look at machine learning and kinds of automation and optimization and, algorithmic approaches to business processes, I think we're in middle innings, and, it's kind of, The Economist had published a couple of months back, like essentially 5 to 10% of Fortune 500 companies are actually using machine learning in a kind of profound way. So, I would say probably in nearly all of the Fortune 500, there's at least a couple of billion-dollar use cases for machine learning that are not currently being implemented. Sure. And that gets back to, you need this internal approach where, and it can just be ideation, but you got to get to that point of like, where is this unlock that we could be going after?
Let's talk about the culture, the leadership culture that inculcates that kind of philosophy. What's your advice? Like, you've got an amazing roster of clients, so you're interacting at the top levels with very innovative organizations. You're probably also pitching organizations that are I don't know, less innovative, or what do you see the culture between those organizations, and what's been your solution to kind of get that? You've run big tech fronting startups like the Ubers of the world. How do you inculcate that culture?
The challenge, I think, is you have the type of organization that is naturally seeking and inquisitive, curious, and looking for that last 10 to 20% of shareholder return and optimization. And I would say just the vast majority of companies aren't like that. They would love to have that, but they don't have innovation processes, and they don't have a culture of innovation that supports that. And, sometimes accidentally they get there. Oftentimes it's sort of a push that comes because the performance doesn't keep up with the companies that are leading.
Sure.
And I think all you can really do is highlight opportunities. And, oftentimes, what happens in an industry, if you look at the way machine learning worked in hospitality, if you look at the way machine learning worked in retail, it was a couple of people who led the industry. If you look at retail, certainly it was Bezos and Jeff Holden and guys like, Rich Williams and people in that early Amazon that were really kind of pushing the envelope. That led to the wide-scale automation of merchandising. And most retailers in the US and Canada were really reticent because they had merchandising-led organizations, and the merchants had a certain way with their spreadsheets of doing things. And, they weren't going to just automate all that stuff away and let consumer demand be tied to supply and all of that stuff, right? And so, if you look at hospitality, it was really Gary Loveman at Harrah's that drove the whole algorithmic revolution.
I was on a panel once with Gary. Early days, I was on a CRM. I remember being on a CRM panel, and he was head of their CRM program. I'm like, wow, you're an impressive guy. You could go somewhere. He was a forward thinker. I didn't spend much time with him, but
So in Gary's particular case, when Phil Sartre hired him over, at the time he was a Harvard professor and he was sort of consulting, and Gary said, I'm not going to be
Time to eat your own dog food, you consultant. You say you can do this stuff. Now do it.
Right. And he said, I'm not going to be the marketing guy. You got to make me COO because I'm not going to compete with the property general managers. I need to be able to tell them what to do because otherwise they're not going to do it. Kind of famously, that whole business, and, if I think back to when I worked for Gary, we ended up we bought the World Series of Poker, we bought the Horseshoe, we bought Caesars Entertainment. At the time, we had twice the per square foot profitability of any other company in the industry. And
radical ideas and loyalty, right? Radical ideas like I'm going to show you what you
right.
I'm going to embarrass you. You see that those folks over there, they're getting way more benefits than you, and you can see that. Kind of an airline perspective. I always thought that was.
It was, and the real moneymakers were, and we would. The crazy thing is, several of myself and several of his deputies were out there. We'd go to all these conventions, and we would literally stand up on stage. And if you look, there's a Harvard Business School case that literally lays out our algos, and we would stand up on stage and say, "This is our playbook. This is how we're twice as profitable as our competitor across the street." And no one would implement it. It was, and famously, kind of a couple years later, we bought Caesars.
Yeah.
So, you kind of look at it.
I had that same experience in a very different context. And I was just in Austin, Texas. And, the best barbecue places are like, here, I'm an open book. If you think you can make it the same way I do, go ahead. And, it's not that easy, right? It's this, I guess what I'm getting at and what you're getting at as well is this mix of culture and technology and innovation and leadership that needs to come together. And I think that's what you're presenting to the market, right? Is like, I've got a different solution. And I understand the HR market. Where do you see that market going in the next few years? Like, what are you preparing for? You're the kind of organization, you're the kind of leader that's looking ahead, as you said before, around the corner, or like. I mean, it's funny when I was reading your brief report, your kind of one pagers. Like, here's what I'm thinking of in 20 years. I'm like, 20 years. I'm just trying to figure out what's happening by the end of the year. So you're clearly a forward thinker. Tell me about what you're seeing in HR and where do you think it's going to be in the short and long term future?
Well, I think broadly speaking, the big opportunities on the people side, they really are. The untapped opportunity is the frontline workforce, and as your audience is largely retailers, I mean, it's, we're all dealing with all these, people challenges and today's market where there's just not enough
people,
sort of talented, skilled workers to hire, and we'd all hire more if we could get them. So I think you sort of boil down, declining workforce, kind of increasing demand. Everybody's growing or hopefully growing. And, you just, net, you got to be more productive. And so what we're building is a set of technologies in a mobile native package that gets you productivity in your workforce. And the two main things that we're focusing on are productivity out of your roster. So sort of avoiding friction and leakage in the roster, enabling self-service in the roster, and part-time workforces and all of this kind of thing with very dynamic scheduling. And the other place is task and sort of keeping people on task, auditing tasks, removing all the friction from sort of task distribution. And, very powerful use case in the retail environment where, you might want to broadcast a task to 1,000 stores at once. Right. And, it might need to be done in the next few hours or
time to put the front window up displays. It's the new campaign. I lived through that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I want all the stores to look the same this morning, kind of thing.
So part of what, and if you think about sort of what the team and I have been working on coming out of the gig economy, like it was obvious to us that, if Uber can manage 100,000 people in one of our cities in real time, distributing tasks and managing rosters, we could apply that to retailers. We could apply that to logistics companies. We could apply it to hospitals and other big parts of the economy. I think you sort of fast forward, and the other part of your question is versus sort of what the HR guys are doing today. Like, I think the front line is a really big part of it. I do believe that there's just going to be more fragmentation of work. I don't think, we're going back on this sort of remote and hybrid. And, in a lot of ways, it's very empowering because, at least as a leader, me of a small tech company, but someone out there who, might be a leader of a 300,000 person, 400,000 person company, you can really get work done everywhere and you can kind of stay on top of it. And, we have automation and essentially going to have smart agents to help you manage the work across the company. And it is not going to look like ERP, and I think that's the big sort of shift, and why I would say I think the entire HR tech industry, the big incumbents, are all sort of at a disadvantage. And, I think Innovator's Dilemma is going to come back and bite them because this is, the ERP process that we've all been living in the last 30 years is I sit down your employees and then I map what they're doing into the software. So it ends up being just, kind of this rigid structure around old processes or legacy processes. And, that is just,
You're talking about upending the process, basically.
Yeah. It's entirely different. In tech, we sort of work from, pilot today and, you and I were talking before the show about some of our mutual acquaintances and sort of the environment that you have and had in Seattle and in the Bay Area and early online retail 20 years ago. We used to always say, like, if you did it once, good, do it manually. But like, if you did it twice or if you did it 3 times, it needed to be automated. And that's not an ERP kind of thing. It's like grab an engineer and, you guys go make that process go away. Like just like put a bot on it tomorrow if it's in any way repeatable.
Interesting.
And I think that sort of mentality, I think that's where enterprise is going, is like largely, we're more the kind of Uber city manager overseeing, a guy or a gal and a team of 3 overseeing 100,000 people is some of the reality. Like that's how the tools are already there. They've already been there for 10 years. I think the next wave is sort of seeing those kinds of highly automated managerial tools being implemented in the enterprise. And that to me is what the real promise of AI and sort of what really, and it kind of defies, as I said earlier, it kind of defies the HR category. This is not Workday, or PeopleSoft. This is real-time operational systems with 100,000 people hanging off of them and, engaging with them. And, it's more like a massive online game than it is, logging into Workday once a quarter to put some paperwork, inputs in.
Well, it's been a great conversation. The last question for you: what advice do you have for retailers? I'm always keen to speak to leaders like yourself who are always talking to leaders. You're both responding to your existing clients and trying to get new clients. And I'm sure some of those meetings are their heads are at a bit of a tilt and trying to just parse the signal from the noise. Is this real? What's he talking about? What's your advice to them and how to parse through and understand the presentations they're getting from folks like yourself?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, like, in any period of technological disruption, we've, if you're senior and you've, been plying your trade for 20 or 30 years, you've seen plenty of these cycles.
Sure.
I think in these cycles, you gotta stay sharp and really kind of keep your eyes and ears out for what's coming. And I think the best way to gauge what's really important is sort of mapping it to your understanding of where really the inefficiency are in your company. And if you've got that map and like, here's where we're really struggling, here's where we really need some improvement, here's some big upside, here's a segment we're not going after because we lack XYZ, then it just makes it a lot easier to sort of engage with companies, even if you're really just waiting for inbound, or if you're out there in active M&A processes and active vendor processes and RFPs, RFIs, then you can really steer it towards those things that are big levers. I think too often we play too incremental a game when it comes to that in corporate life, right? It's, I've got a process that exists. I want to make it 5% better. That starts from that ideation process and really just kind of staying on top of the opportunities out there.
Yeah, fantastic. How do people get in touch with you and learn more about the company? Are you a LinkedIn person?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn and certainly at our website at movo.co. That's movo.co.
Great. And you operate worldwide? You'd operate in Canada? Do you have clients here, North America, certainly?
We do. We're in about 8 countries at this point. English and half a dozen other languages. So absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, Jason, thanks for joining me on The Voice of Retail. It's great to hear your story and get to know a bit about you and your perspectives and the organization. I wish you continued success. And thanks again for spending some time with me on the Voice of Retail podcast.
Michael, thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.